Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. As you're probably aware, my guiding principle for what to make videos about on this channel is simply that I make videos about anything that interests me. That said, one interest of mine that you may not be aware of, simply because it's not particularly videogenic, is creative writing. I have been dabbling in writing fiction ever since I learned how to read, if not before. However, today I have an exciting announcement relating to my creative writing hobby. I have finally published a novel. Now, this is actually a science fiction novel that I wrote back when I was in college, but more recently I dusted off my old manuscript, tried to clean up a few typos, and then finally went through with the publication process. So this is available on Amazon, both as a paperback and as an ebook. The title is Expedition to Earth, and I published it under the name Tim the Idahoan, since thanks to all of you who subscribe to this channel, there's a lot more people who would recognize me by that name than who know me in person. The premise of the book is that sometime in the next couple hundred years, mankind establishes colonies on the moon. And sometime thereafter, there is a devastating nuclear war that breaks out on planet Earth, during which the colonies lose all contact with planet Earth. They're never able to reestablish communications with any Earth-based sites. Now, at that time, the colonies are barely self-sufficient. They are able to survive, but it takes them a very long time to build up enough indigenous heavy industry to where they can actually construct a spaceship and launch an expedition back to Earth to see what happened and figure out what's left of humanity in the aftermath of this war. So this, of course, is the story of that first expedition that the colonies launch back to Earth. And of course, the expedition doesn't go entirely as planned. The ship sustains some damage and has to make a forced landing. The primary protagonist ends up getting separated from the main body of the expeditionary force, and various adventures ensue, which I'm not going to describe in any more detail than that because I don't want to give away the whole plot. Now, as I said, I was in college when I wrote this book, and I would still say that college-age individuals probably represent the ideal target audience for it, but that's not to say that people younger or older than that age group may not enjoy it if they have an adequate reading level and appropriate set of interests. Certainly, I would say it's a fairly clean book. It doesn't really have any profanity or crude language in it. It doesn't really have any sexual themes of any kind in it. It is fairly action-packed, so if you're someone who's really sensitive about the issue of violence in fiction, that might be the one thing that you could find fault with, but obviously I personally don't think that the battle scenes and so forth that it portrays are presented in a way that is excessively graphic or otherwise objectionable. So I would think that it would be appropriate for anyone with the adequate reading level to read and comprehend the story. Now, as many of you know if you've been following my channel, I have a deep interest in Christian theology. However, in contrast to most of my more recent and yet unpublished writing projects, this book doesn't really have a lot of deep philosophical or theological content. There is sort of an overarching theme of redemption. The primary protagonist at the beginning of the story doesn't really have a use for God. Eventually, circumstances bring him to reconsider that perspective, and he actually makes some promises to God, which he promptly forgets as soon as his circumstances improve. and then of which he is reminded towards the end of the book and finally follows through. So there is kind of that overarching theme of redemption or salvation, but there's really not a lot of theological content in the book. Mostly it's written just as kind of a light, entertaining story. Now, one other thing that I guess I'll mention, just because it was mentioned to me by a couple of different people who reviewed the book during the proofreading process, was that this book is written in a lot of detail. I guess I'm a fairly detail-oriented person, and that just comes out in my writing. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on your perspective. You know, some people, like myself, who are fairly detail-oriented, appreciate having a lot of detail in a book because it allows us to visualize what's going on in more detail, and that makes it more engaging. Other people who maybe are not as detail-oriented can sort of get bogged down in the details, and that makes it less engaging. So it just depends on your perspective or your preference there. Now, speaking of book reviewers, I do have a number of complimentary copies of this book that I was planning on sending out to book reviewers. So if you are a book reviewer and you're interested in writing a review of this book, or if you have recommendations as to book reviewers that I should contact, please let me know in the comments. And until next time, thank you for watching The Idahoan Show.